Welcome to my series of basketball videos where I'll be comparing various NBA grades against each other. I'm doing this because I find that a lot of the basketball videos comparing players on YouTube are too focused on the big names, and sometimes compare players from different positions. For example, lots of people compare Jordan to LeBron and Kobe to Duncan, just because of their similar levels of achievements, but since those players play different positions and have different styles of play, it's not an interesting comparison. In this series, I want to do a comparison not between just more well-known players, but players from days past, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and even the ABA as well, that most modern fans probably do not have too much knowledge about. Also, as much as possible, I want to compare players that play similar positions and have similar play styles. To me, that's a more interesting and fruitful comparison. I'll be using 6 different metrics to compare each player. The first category is scoring. This category will be defined by each player's career points per game, peak points per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of scoring titles. Rebounding. This category will be defined by each player's career rebounds per game, peak rebounds per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of rebounding titles. Passing. This category will be defined by each player's career assists per game, peak assists per game both regular season and playoffs, and number of assist titles. Efficiency and advanced metrics. This category will be defined by each player's career true shooting percentage per and win shares per 48, both in the regular season and playoffs. The reason I use true shooting percentage is because it's more fair to guards. Field goal percentage tends to be biased to big men because of their height and play style closer to the basket. I also put in win shares per 48 here because it encompasses efficiency along with other attributes to give you an idea of how many wins a player contributes to his team. Defense. This category will be defined by each player's all defensive selections, defensive win shares, and defensive player of the year awards. The reason I'm not using blocks and steals in this comparison is because I want to compare the achievements of older players that modern fans might not have too much knowledge about, and players in the 1960s and early 1970s do not have steals and blocks tracked. Awards. This category will be defined by All-Star appearances, All-NBA selections, MVPs, Finals MVPs, and championships as the first, second, or third best player. The reason I have to only count championships as a top 3 player on the team is because otherwise you get into the situation where, for example, Robert Horry has 7 rings and Karl Malone has 0, and it's not representative of how much better a player is if they weren't a top 3 player on their team contributing to a championship. I know including All-Star selections is a little bit controversial because it's fan voted, but ultimately this is what the Hall of Fame uses in their criteria to induct a player, as unfair as it sounds. Also, I'll be including ABA stats and awards and using them as equivalent to their respective NBA stats and awards. The only one that's different about the ABA is that instead of Finals MVP, they have Playoffs MVP, which honestly is a better idea than Finals MVP since it accounts for the whole playoffs, but just to keep it simple, I'll be referring to the ABA Playoffs MVP as Finals MVP here. Also, no All-NBA third team selections are counted, because All-NBA third teams weren't added until the late 80s, which is unfair to older players. Also, I'm not using any career total stats because that's a longevity thing. For example, no one would say that Karl Malone was a better scorer than Michael Jordan, even though he has more total points. And of course, this is only going to be my opinion from comparing the available metrics, since I have not watched most of these players live, or even been born when some of these players have been playing. And to keep it fair, I'm judging them based on how they did in their own era. No time travel or what if this NBA player played in today's era or the 1960s, none of that. I'll be strictly basing their stats and accomplishments within their own era against that era's competition, which makes the most sense to me. So I hope you guys enjoy this comparison video and hopefully learn something new from it. The 13th episode in the series looks at 2 all-time great perimeter defenders of the 1980s who could lock up almost anyone in their era. Joe Dumars was a key part of the Bad Boy Pistons dynasty, a player who could act as a primary or secondary offensive option for his team and also be the primary perimeter defender for a team who relished defending opponents, while Sidney Moncrief was the leader of the 1980s Bucks, a team who always came close but fell short of championship aspirations. Like Dumars, Moncrief acted as the primary and sometimes secondary offensive option for his team, but also acting as the primary perimeter defender for his underrated 1980s Bucks. Which player had the better career? Let's find out. In this category, while scoring wouldn't be considered the main strength of either player, they could definitely get it done if their team needed it. Dumars averaged 16.1 points per game for his career, peaking at 20.4 points per game in 1991, and 15.6 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 20.6 points per game in 1991. While Moncrief averaged 15.6 points per game for his career, peaking at 22.5 points per game in 1983, and 16 points a game in the playoffs, peaking at 23 points a game in 1985. Their numbers are very similar to each other. Dumars was often, along with Isaiah Thomas, the main offensive option for his team, while Moncrief supplanted Marcus Johnson as the main scorer for his team. Neither player really holds a significant advantage over the other, although Moncrief had the slightly higher peaks, it wasn't by a lot, so I'll have to call this category a tie. This category isn't really that close because Dumars was a below average rebounder for his position. He only averaged 2.2 rebounds a game for his career and 2.3 rebounds a game for the playoffs. Even his peaks aren't as high as Moncrief's career rebounding averages, which are definitely higher at 4.7 rebounds per game for his career and 5 rebounds per game for the playoffs, peaking at almost 7 rebounds per game in both the regular season and playoffs. Moncrief is noticeably the more athletic player, and the rebounding reflects that. So this category goes to Moncrief. In the passing category, Dumars now gets the upper hand as he averaged 4.5 assists per game, peaking at 5.7 a game in 1989, and 4.6 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 6.3 a game in 1986. Meanwhile, Moncrief averaged 3.6 assists per game for his career, peaking at 5.2 a game in 1985, and 3.4 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 5 assists a game in 1985. Dumars was actually quite a capable passer for his position, and this is reflected in his lead over Moncrief in this category, so this category will go to Joe Dumars. In the efficiency and advanced metrics category, it goes to Moncrief, as he was a bit more efficient than Dumars, and that's reflected in the higher true shooting percentage, higher PER, and higher win shares per 48 compared to Dumars. So this category will go to Moncrief. In the defense category, this is what both players were known for, their tenacious perimeter defense. Both have 4 all-defensive first-team selections and 1 all-defensive second-team selection, although their defensive win shares look oddly lower than expected compared to their offensive win shares. This category is close, but Moncrief's 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards give him the edge here. And note that Dumars and Moncrief both played in the same era, and Dumars did not get any Defensive Player of the Years, although one could say that maybe Dumars got snubbed for a Defensive Player of the Year in some years. Nevertheless, I'll give this category to Moncrief by a slight margin. In the awards category, they have a similar amount of All-Star appearances, but Moncrief leads Dumars in All-NBA first and second team selections as he has 5, whereas Dumars only has 1. However, Dumars had much more success in the postseason as he was the second best player on the Pistons team for 2 championships and made it 3 NBA Finals. He also has a Finals MVP, which gives him the edge over Moncrief. So I'll give this category to Dumars. So when all the categories are summed up, Sidney Moncrief takes the rebounding, efficiency, and defense categories, while Joe Dumars takes the passing and awards categories, while scoring is a tie, giving the win to Moncrief. Joe Dumars is widely regarded as one of the best Pistons players of all time, and the second best player on the Bad Boy Pistons, a solid offensive player and a tenacious defender, while Sidney Moncrief has been somewhat a more underrated player, as his team wasn't quite as good as the Bad Boy Pistons and couldn't get over the hump past the Celtics or the 76ers. However, like Dumars, he was a solid offensive option and an all-time great defender for a team that really tends to be forgotten amongst the great 1980s teams. So I hope you guys enjoyed this comparison. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next comparison video.